will get started. I'm a psychologist by trade and a management consultant in private practice. I still kind of semi-retired and work mostly with organizations like Hallmark and U.S. Department of Labor and different organizations and smaller not-for-profits. So that's kind of been my career. Okay, Jerry, I'll start with you. And the questions I would like answered are you new to genealogy? Are you working from an old family tree or some old family history? What are you interested in? Are there particular areas or countries that you're interested in? Or do you have a particular genealogical riddle that is bugging you? So anyway, if you would just tell me that. So I'll start with Jerry.
Yeah, I'm really starting on the bottom from working through this genealogy. I've never really worked at it or been, and I've got a cousin that has, so I'm going to be interested in talking to her as maybe I have time to pursue some of the leads that you're going to be helping us with. But I've always assumed I'm probably from the British Isles area. You know, family, maybe Germany. I know my grandmother talked about Pennsylvania Dutch, which basically is German Deutsch.
Of course, Pennsylvania Dutch were not Dutch; they were Rhine Germans.
German, right? So anyway, I don't think she even knew that, but anyway, yeah, so it's kind of a interest. I think it would be fun. Your comment about this is that it's addictive, and but I think it would be fun to be involved in doing it. So you know, that's why I kind of took the class to get a beginning with some tools to work for. So that's why I'm here.
Very good. And my other question is, have you done any DNA?
No.
Okay. Yeah,
we've had a couple friends had some kind of remarkable findings come out of their family over DNA results. So it's kind of but no, I have not.
Okay. It's interesting that you say the Pennsylvania Dutch, because I'll tell a story later on about the Pennsylvania Dutch, who are actually Palatines. So that's a new word I learned. I had no idea what it was until I started researching it. Okay. All right. So thank you, Jerry. Hopefully we'll maybe pin down a little bit closer to where your family's origins are. Yeah. All right. Ted? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, I started 2 years ago right now in your class.
Oh, that's right.
So I had never done anything up to that point, but I had some family stuff and that I had gone through, and so I had a pretty good start on one line. So anyway, in those 2 years now, it's become kind of a passionate thing for me. So I do genealogy probably almost a little bit. I might sit down at the computer and do 10 minutes a day. I mean, you know, I do it all the time, and it's really become enjoyable. And I've made some trips looking at some old cemeteries out in western Kansas and sharing all that information. I first started going to the Genealogy Center over on Lee Summit Road and using their library sources. And then about 6 months into it, I got onto Ancestry. And so I've been doing on Ancestry. That's where my focus has been, and that's where I've made my tree. It's just a lot. It's just I'm just amazed at what is available out there. And also then it leads to learning about history. I knew that I had one ancestor that was in the Civil War, but then as I've uncovered all my other ancestors that were were around here at the time, I don't think anybody could stay away from the Civil War. You know, everybody was in the Civil War. So it's just amazing to find what you can find in Fold 3, and you know, the government has put so many resources. So you know, and I've taken some classes at the Genealogy Center, one of them on Fold 3. So it's just fascinating. I have since met some like second cousins that I really wasn't aware of, but they're into ancestry. So they've been doing genealogy since they were in high school. So so they've been able to share some information and what they're doing, and I've been able to share some family heirlooms back and forth. This one in Vermont had a Bible of my grandmother's, which would have been her grandmother's sister, and so she sent that to me. And finding pictures of her confirmation where they're holding their Bibles. I mean, it's just these family heirlooms that you can make all these connections are just amazing. So I've done a lot. My family tree's getting very filled out. I do have a couple of roadblocks that I've hit. One of them on my mother's side and one on my father's side. The one on my father's side, it just goes back to immigration from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to educate myself on some German systems that have all the German records. And I know that there's one out there that I learned about at the Genealogy Center over in Lee Summit or in the Independence, but I haven't taken the time to learn it or do it yet. But I know that's the direction I need to go now to get farther back on that one side in Germany. So I've got to do that. There's a one side on my mother's, great-great-grandfathers, where both of these stopped for me. And I've met this second cousin in Colorado who has been doing this since she was in high school. And she's taken the DNA approach. So I have done my DNA. That has been helpful to her. My mother lives with us now. She's 95. So I had my mother do the DNA, and that helped her. And she's getting these different families, and there's a different family name that nobody really knew about, but there's all these DNA matches with them. And then it would have been helpful to have one of my uncles do it. So I got my uncle to do DNA. And so that goes back to the male Y chromosome coming down. So I've just finished reading my first book on DNA, got it from the library. And so I'm just now learning about DNA and know enough to be dangerous. But I see that this second cousin goes in. I've given her full access to the DNA results. So I go in every once in a while, look at the DNA, and I see that she's doing family grouping. And so she found that my uncle's DNA was going to be very, very helpful in what she had been suspecting to be the case. And now that's kind of confirmed some things for some other families. So the DNA thing is kind of amazing as to what you can do, but right now it's still a lot of it's above my head, but I do know the value in it. So
well, that's excellent. Ted, good to see you again. And one of the things that Ted is pointing out that's kind of interesting is that, and we'll do a segment on DNA later on, and maybe Ted can jump in since he's been in touch with all of this, but getting his mother tested and getting his uncle tested is really, really a huge step forward, because you've got to remember that most of the DNA matches, for instance, my grandmother, just my grandmother, we're talking about 120 years ago when she was born, and her parents 150 years ago. So if you have parents or older uncles or male and female relatives, do jump in and get them tested, because that will really help you jump probably 2 generations in your DNA. And I had an interesting exchange with a young woman, and I've said that I'm after my grandmother, who was orphaned as a baby. And I know I found out that she was Polish. Well, I'm coming up with all of these 100% and 97% East Europeans, which means and they're American, and they're all in South Bend, Indiana. So I'm related to them through my grandmother, and it can only be. So when I approach these people, they tell me they've never heard of me, so therefore I can't be related to them. Well, and I say to them, we're talking about 150 years. If your father has never heard of me, I can understand that, because he wouldn't have known my grandmother 150 years ago. So all of these people are just convinced that, they cannot be related to somebody that they don't know. But had I tested my mother, and, or, that would have been extremely helpful. Now, what you can do is you can go and get the, you can do the testing that just tests your mother's maternal line. And that is a little more expensive than the regular Ancestry or 23andMe, but it does only get you your mother's descendants. So I'm about ready to do that. It's about $160. And to me, it's worth it just to wipe out all the rest of my Irish and Scottish people that I will barely get any of them on my mother's line. So anyway, okay. So thank you, Ted. That's and you did a wonderful job for encouraging people to get DNA if they want to. Okay, Mary, we'll go to you next. Do you unmute yourself?
Hi, I actually am very new to this whole process. I have some history, especially from my mother's side, that her sister, my aunt, she wrote me a letter maybe when I was in college a long time ago, and detailed the history of our family, just the names, and with some names and dates and birthplaces and that kind of thing. And miraculously, I actually saved that letter all this time, and I have it. So I do have quite a few names and dates and locations.
Oh, you got frozen.
Much on what?
You were frozen there for a minute.
I did the answer. Oh, I know. I need to actually do somewhere else to do this next time. But am I? Oh no, my internet connection.
Go ahead.
Am I back yet?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
You're back.
I did the ancestry DNA, and it came back that I'm 96% Irish and 4% Scottish. So basically Irish. So that will help, because my parents were Irish on both sides, and I think it was the great grandparents on both sides who came here from Ireland, because I know my mother's mother and father and my father's mother and father were all born in either Washington, D.C., New Jersey, or New York.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very sort of close together. So that helps a little bit, I guess, because it's all Irish. So I don't have a lot of variations in my family. But anyway, that's all I've done. I did get contacted when I did my DNA on Ancestry. I did get contacted by a couple of second or third cousins who I came up with as matches, and they told me when I joined. I haven't joined Ancestry yet because I haven't been ready to actually do anything, but now I am. So I'm thinking of joining Ancestry and actually beginning to do this more, seriously. And they have a lot of information when I do join. So, from their perspective and their families. So that may be helpful to me. When I actually join, we can sort of link our trees and see what comes up. I'm not really sure how that works.
Yeah. Well, Mary, what you're talking about are collateral relatives. And many people, when they get stuck on their own family, they go and research collateral relatives, the uncles, the aunts, etc. I have even gone so far as to do collateral neighbors, because oftentimes groups immigrated together from one part of the country to the other. and you find I read the censuses and figure out that I'm seeing some familiar names next to them. So I have even gone so far as to do that. And you often find that those collateral relatives will give you information, or in your case, you've run across people who have more information, which will give you the patterns about your family. Like, why did they immigrate from this area to another? I mean, you probably know why they came from Ireland. You know, they were all starving. And, you know, when did they come? Did they come in the famine years? Were they that wave of people that came in the early, late 1900s, where again, is a different type of pattern. And that reminds me, Mary talked about Ancestry. If any of you are not Ancestry members, it is free right now at the Midwest Genealogical Library. And that is the library edition. You cannot build a tree, but you can look at everyone else's trees and you can access all the records that they have. So I'm not certain that they have Irish records on the library edition, because that's usually a more sophisticated world membership. I have that. It's like $400 a year. And I do that because I do, you know, all kinds of European and Irish and Scottish ancestry. And I also, but Ancestry, the regular edition will give you the all the US records, and they will give you Canadian records. So all you have to do is get a Midwest, a mid-continent library card, which you can do online. And then you go into the Midwest Genealogy Library. And it's the one that Ted was talking about out on Lee Summit Road. It is open now for research. They just opened this last couple of weeks. So anyway, but you can do it from home, and those records are open until June. And again, you cannot build a tree, but you can look at everyone else's tree. So, and another thing to talk about, like for instance, if you do Ancestry DNA, they give you access to your records, they give you access to your DNA records. And I think some limited access to build your own tree. And so that helps for DNA, that you can build a tree and have others contact you, because that's what you want, is to get the matches from the cousins who have more information. All my cousins that I'm connected to want to disown me. I mean, they don't want to, you know, but what the other thing about it is that with DNA, you've got to remember that many people do it just to find out their ethnicity. You know, they want to know, am I Czech? You know, is it really true that I was Scottish? Am I German, etc. So they do the ethnicity, and they really don't even want to put up a tree, because they're not genealogists, and they just don't have any information. And I've seen trees that have 3 people on it. It's them, their mother, and their father, and they list them as private. So what kind of information does it give you? You know, you've already got their name from the DNA results. So it could be somewhat disappointing if you're expecting to get all of these connections. For instance, I got all of my first cousins who've done DNA, because everyone, and a lot of people in our family on my father's side are interested in genealogy because of the work that I have done for over 30 to 40 years. And so they're interested in it, but I already knew they were my first cousins. So it's not telling me anything. And they're not real genealogists. Basically, they copy my tree and that's it. But anyway, okay. So thank you, Mary. David, we'll go on to you.
Well, thank you. Good to be here this morning. I had a phone call from a granddaughter last fall who was a senior at Missouri State and was in a class, and she needed an answer that afternoon as to where her great-grandparents were born in the years. And I've had 2 boxes in my basement, one from the Raymer side, and one from my wife's side, which is Caldenberg. And so that sparked my interest, and I did get her answers, and then I sit down and put out a little hand-drawn family tree to all the grandkids and the great-grandkids who the parents had to read to them at this point, but at least they have some basic information. So I'm a real apprentice and anxious to learn how to do it officially. So happy to be here.
Very good. And what areas are you interested in, David?
Well, I have very few living relatives. I'm quite old, as you can see. And I have one cousin back in Tennessee, and that's the only first cousin I know of. I've read some of the genealogy that my dad and his cousin put together 50 years ago, and traveling Europe 60 years ago, stumbled onto some Ramers, and they shared with me their family tree. So we go back into the 1600s, but and I think the Kaldenbergs almost go back that far too. So just want to get a little more information that I'm all German.
Oh, very good. Okay. Well, and German ancestry is a little bit easier than some because most Germans were baptized. And so there will be church records which give the mother and the father. And those records are fairly readily available. But it's to pin down an area is sometimes tough, because you would think that, like, for instance, your name, Romer, seems somewhat unique, but once you start looking in those German records, you will find that there's somebody in Wittenberg, and then there's somebody over here in Bavaria, and so which family is it? So that's the issue that we find out, that just because we have the same name doesn't mean that it's our family. One of my family names that I'm constantly researching is Waldron. Waldron. Well, it is a Dutch name, it is an Irish name, and it is a Scottish name. And when I was researching in Scotland, I had many church people tell me, Lassie, Waldron is not a Scottish name. They came over here. But they're Irish. And so it turns out that probably that's really true, because I'm kind of half Irish, half Scottish on both my sides, with the one Polish grandmother. And my DNA comes out heavily Irish, and it should be more Scottish. But as I've researched, I found that all those Scots weren't really Scots. They lived in Scotland, they were born in Scotland, but they're Irish. And so probably Waldron. I also have a family name that's called Hockery, which has been mangled. It's in the Scottish church records. And again, in Scotland, I had people tell me, church people, that's not a Scottish name. And what it turns out to be is, guess what? An Irish name, and not spelled Hochrie, but it's probably Hockery, Haugherty, Hockery, or RY. And that's an Irish name. So that my DNA kind of plays that out, that I should be more 50, I should be like 45% Scottish, and I'm not. I'm 65% Irish. So if you take all those family names that aren't really Scottish and make them Irish, then my DNA makes sense. So anyway, but we'll talk about that more later. But anyway, okay. So thank you, David. Nancy, and you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, good morning. At first, my computer was messed up, so I was on with my phone. Now I'm on with my computer, and you can see me live. Okay, so I was adopted when I was a baby, when I was a month old. And so it was home for unwed mothers here in Kansas City. So years ago, the records were still sealed in the Jackson County Court. I don't know if they still are or not. I think they still are. And so I was never interested, really. I'd known I was adopted. My adopted parents told me ever since before I could remember. So I've always known, and I've never had really any interest in finding my biological parents. But my daughter has always wanted to know ever since she was a teenager. So she had the National Geographic DNA done about in 2010. And then just a few years ago, she had the Ancestry DNA done for both of us. So then through Ancestry DNA, she's just a few months ago, after it would send emails that there's matches. And so she really started looking into it just a few months ago, and she thinks she has found everything now. And like, I think it was David's granddaughter who he said that figured it out in a half an hour. My daughter's a librarian, so she's used to doing research, and she figured it out. The one side, you know, took her a few hours. I think the other side she figured out in like a half an hour and called me back. And so my daughter's in California. She's a librarian in Berkeley. So I haven't got to talk to her or see this information in person since she just did this. So I told her I would take this class and learn what I could. And then when hopefully I can visit her in May and we can look at what the records she's built, but she thinks she's found both parents.
Interesting.
Just through the DNA matches.
Wow.
And very, very oddly, when I was like about 38, my adopted parents handed me a piece of paper that had been in the bottom of their safety deposit box that they had completely forgotten about. And it apparently had my real name on it, not the name of my mother, but it would have been her last name. And I probably shouldn't have had that piece of paper since those records are sealed in Jackson County. And so using that one name, my daughter, she could match that up to things that she had found that through Ancestry DNA. So I just want to get some more information, and I'd like to know if what she did was correct, but it must be. She's entirely convinced of everything she's found. And so she didn't know anything about genealogy either, but she researched census records and graveyard records, cemetery records. So I just want to, verify what she's done when I get to go out and visit her.
Interesting. I dealt with a lot of adoptees who are trying to do that kind of same research. And in fact, in my own family tree, I came up with 2 first cousins that I had never heard about on my father's side. And they contacted me and said that they had looked at my tree and had seen all the pictures, and that they thought that I was far enough away from the family that they were investigating as to their true parents. And, could I keep this confidential, because they did not want to have family reunions. They did not want to get in touch with anyone. They just wanted to know their parentage. And so it turns out that they had worked with, I guess there are adoption specialists that work with genealogy and DNA, and they had helped them figure out that it was my father's family of origin. And in fact, it was probably this person was the child of one of my first cousins. And I don't know exactly who at the time, when this started, but they just wanted to know backgrounds. And then there was a second one that approached me almost the same way and said that she was in contact with the first one. And same deal, that the second one was a little angrier that, she was never told all this. But after her adopted mother had died, her adopted father told her that it was California, said that records were not sealed, that he had all the information. And if she ever wanted to know it, he would tell her. But he did not want to do it while her adopted mother was still alive. So that's how she got the information. So there's various ways, and it could be that the policy of wherever your mother gave birth to you, that maybe they did keep some records like the name of the mother and the real name that you were named. I've heard that before with other adoptees that in Missouri. So the official records may be sealed, but the place where your mother gave birth may have given other records to the adopted parents. So that's a possibility. But it sounds like your daughter is on a good trajectory, and the DNA does not lie. I mean, and it's, if you've got first cousins, their parents have to be, your uncles or your parents. So your daughter knows research skills, and she knows logic and applying research skills, and she knows evidence and proof. And so that's all part of the basis of genealogy. So it sounds like she's going to have some answers for you. And I think that my particular feeling, Nancy, is that most people hit a point in their lives, and Bruno Bettelheim, the philosopher, calls it generativity. And it's that when we hit middle age, we want to know certain things, and we want to know what we're going to give or leave for our descendants. And that might be family history. That might be knowledge of my family. For instance, only my older nephews knew my mother, who died 30 years ago. My youngest son doesn't remember her. My nieces and nephews that are younger barely remember her. And so there's a part of me that really wants them to have a memory of her. So I'm thinking of doing like a book, just an album book of pictures, just about her and her early life and where she lived and what she did when she married and who were her cousins and all that, and do it in a picture form, just so that they have this about their grandmother who is a bare memory. Now it'll have a lot of meaning for my own nephews, my older nephews, because they knew her and knew her until she died at 83. So that's a part of generativity, that you want to leave something behind. So it sounds like your daughter, wants to have that kind of link, and there may be emotional issues for you, but once we jump down a generation, people are fairly, I want to say blasé about it. We were talking about DNA at my last book club group, and my 83-year-old friend said that her brother had done DNA and they came up with a new sister.
Yeah.
And I said, what? And she said, yeah. She said, obviously her father had a child out of wedlock, but her brother got on there and did some detective work and did Facebook and Instagram and all that, and figured out that it was their father's longtime assistant. And they even located a picture of this woman, and she looks exactly like one of their older sisters. And so I said to my friend, is this, being a psychologist, I felt like I needed to jump in with, care and empathy. And I said, is this an issue for you? And she said, I'm 83, who cares at this point? So my father played around. It's not a big surprise, but what is interesting is that the woman does not want to be contacted by any part of that family. It's not fuzzy reunions and Hallmark moments. She just wants them to get the heck away from her. So, but her brother says he's determined that he's going to track her down and, not, I don't know, confront her or just get her to acknowledge or meet her. I don't know what is, but anyway, so it's,
I'm going
so
to throw this,
everyone can,
I'll throw this in. When I read this book, the third chapter was about ethics in DNA, and it was
yes.
very insightful. So that is something to
Yeah,
Well, thank you for talking about the ethics, because as soon as my daughter found out, and she's convinced this is the person, so I guess through the DNA it's correct. She wanted to contact the man, and he's, oh, I don't know, 86 or 87, and I don't want her to contact him. And she was ready to, call him or email him right then. She's very excited about it. And then apparently on the mother's side, she has passed away. And so then I don't know if any of her family ever knew, because she came to Kansas City to the Home for Unwed Mothers. So it's possible that, and she was not a teenager, so it's possible that, nobody knew. So I really don't want to disrupt anything. My daughter wants to, contact people. So, I'm going to go out and we're going to look at the stuff. We're going to talk about it a lot.
yeah.
But thank you for the thing about the ethics.
That's a good point. It really is, because I kind of feel like I'm kind of in between with my cousins, that I don't know how many of my first cousins know the family story or know that there's these adoptees out there. And I just, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because my mother had a first cousin that grew up in her household, and they were later roommates in Chicago during the Depression. And the way that we are connected is my mother's first cousin was orphaned, and she grew up in my mother's household. My grandmother kind of raised her, and she ended up marrying my father's brother. So there are two Corcoran brothers, and the two first cousins married one another. So I'm double cousins with all of my Corcoran side. So that's where the adoptees come from. So one day I've been doing genealogy with one of my younger cousins, and she kept on saying, it's so funny. It would be her grandparents, Agnes and Jack. They never celebrated their anniversary, and they never wanted anybody to know when they got married. And I was just, they said, it's our private anniversary and it's none of your business.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so funny. And I said, well, that's because you do know that their oldest child was born when Agnes was single, and they didn't get married till she was 3 or 4 years old. And so that's why they've never done that, because, obviously they don't want the date, her birth date and their dates and all that. And my young cousin said, I don't know that. I've never heard that, And I said, well, it was not a secret. My mother always talked about it, just matter of fact, etc. So anyway, so the young cousin then said, oh, I've got to go tell everybody. I've got to tell, Marilyn, the child, that she's not, the real child and all this. And I was just aghast. And I said, you can't do that. That's, but I was, in a terrible position that I had spilled what I did not consider a family secret, and the entire other side of the family, and we're talking about 106 people, never knew this vital information. Now, all the people are dead. The daughter is still alive, but this young, 40 something wanted to get on the phone and tell her, her aunt that she was not really, from our family except through her mother's side, and it was just, and so anyway, luckily some other cousins, I got some other older cousins to talk her down. and to not spill the beans. But then she did DNA last year and figured it out. But that was her journey, not, you know, not a young cousin telling her. So Ted, thanks for pointing out the ethics of that, because there are ethical issues and there are emotional issues, you know, that are very deep. But okay, so thank you for that. All right. Well, let's get started. Talk about what genealogy really is. And I am going to, you all have your packet of handouts that I will refer to, but I'm going to start my PowerPoint right now. And let's see, I'm going to do share screen. Hold on just a minute. Okay. Of course it's not sharing. Okay. You all see that? Okay. Those are my grandparents, by the way, that my grandmother's on the right. She's the Polish orphan. that is the
I don't think we see it yet.
Okay, you're not seeing that. Okay. Let me put shared screen. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Oh no. Okay. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I was going to say, this is my grandparents, my Polish orphan on the right. Okay. So part of genealogy is good methodology, is getting and staying organized. And in your handouts, you have a research log. And I would encourage you to use that, to take good research notes. And yesterday I was looking at a census and I realized that I had not put down the page number. I had not put down all the information. And I had to go back into Ancestry. I was looking for an age of a daughter, and I had to go back into Ancestry and go through all the mechanics of pulling up the 1900 census just to get the notes that I should have taken correctly the first time. And so I would encourage you to be particular about your notes. And one of the things that I do is I just use regular loose leaf paper. And across the top, I put who I'm researching. Let's say that I am researching the Waldron daughters. And I will just put that down. Also date, you know, put down today's date, 3/23/21, because you want to know when you did that research. Did you do it 8 years ago? Did you do it yesterday? Did you do it this week? So I like to have a date, and then I like to put what I'm researching. I'm looking for the Waldron daughters in the 1880 census. And sometimes my search, I'm not really certain what I'm searching for, but so I'll just put, you know, researching, you know, this family. I don't have a specific question. And no matter how little research you've gathered, start by deciding how you organize it, because you get overwhelmed with paperwork. I am a person who really likes binders, and I will keep things in a particular binder. For example, this one says Leonard Family Genealogy, and in it I have my I have a family tree, and I have put some notes there of people that I look up a lot because I want their birth dates right there. And in it, I have a family tree that I have done on Family Tree Maker. Now, Family Tree Maker is a separate, it is just a data, let's see, it's just a way to keep data. It does family trees for you. and it used to sync with Ancestry Family Tree. Now you can download things from Family Tree, but they're a little hard. I don't think they're as clean as having a separate program. I like a separate program because it will do descendant trees like this. If you could see this, it's a descendant tree of all the descendants. It starts with Michael Leonard in 1846, which is my first Irish relative that I know about. And it goes all the way 5 pages down to, you know, the youngest child. Then it has pages like this that are just a family page that has the husband, the wife, and then the listing of all their children. So it's very easy to look at, and I like to have it in a folder like this. I have a folder on most of my families. Now, I can look that up on Ancestry because I have an ancestry tree that has all of that, including their photos. But sometimes when I'm doing research, I just don't want to go back into Ancestry and get out of the censuses or get out of the records that I'm in to look at back and forth. Now, if you're more computer literate and you like to have all of your stuff on computers, do that. But I really find it much easier when I'm doing research to just pick this up. The same with my DNA, that I have some DNA books that I'm keeping, and much easier to do DNA that way. Okay, let's see. This is an example of a research calendar, and I have put a couple, I think I've done a couple of them in your packet. This is one that the family I'm searching for is Alice Parks. The area is general. And over here to the left are all the call numbers, the library call numbers, National Archive records that I looked for. And I've got the 1910 census. I've looked at Ancestry. I'm the 1920 census for Yakima, Washington, back to some microfiche, the 1930 Idaho. So I'm looking for the person Alice Parks, and I'm trying to find her family. And the purpose is over here. In the 1910, I'm looking for Alice Parks, and I find that her name is Alice Starr. So she's married, and her husband is Charles. The comments found, living with family, Charles and Alice B. Parks, niece, age 17, born Dakota. That's the person I'm looking for. Father born New York, mother born Minnesota, must be Lily Redoubt's daughter. Okay, so that tells me what I found in 1910. I found a niece living with her aunt and uncle. And then, so anyway, so this is just the process of looking for this particular Alice Parks. And I go to 1920 and I find Alice is married to Virgil Smith, and she has 3 daughters. I go to 1930. She found a Virgil Smith age difference, but may or may not be the right one. And in 1930, I found an Alice Smith, a lodger, a school teacher born North Dakota. That might be the right one. And then 1930, San Francisco, found a another daughter. So anyway, so that just tells me the path that I am taking to find Alice Parks. Then I went on the Minnesota message board for Douglas County, and that is on Ancestry. And it's not as quite as up to date as I would like. People used message boards a lot more in the past, but I have found things in old ones that aren't anywhere else. And I found an obituary abstract of Lydia Parks in the Alexandra Post News that gave her death, and then also found the death of her parents. So anyway, so this is just an example of a research calendar that I actually do online. and tells me what I look for. And so let's say that I'm trying to put together a tree for Alice Parks. Well, right there, I have her possible marriage. I have her daughters. It tells me where she was living when she was age 17, you know, on and on. Then down here is an obituary of both of her parents. So that gives me a way to fill in my tree. Any questions about that? And you know, you can hand write these. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to do them on computer, but you know, a lot of times I will write research notes at the top of my my research. Also, what I said that I like notebooks a lot better than I do a computer. I also use, just a minute. I also use archival library files, and I was counting this morning, and I have 29 of them in my bookcase. And these are usually each on a family. Like this might be my Corcoran family, and I have one on my Waldrons, and then, you know, keep on splitting them. And until a file gets big enough that I have more on a family, I usually won't split up the in-laws too much unless I'm really researching them like crazy. So I have 29 of those files, and I have lots of notebooks. And one of these days, I'm going to have to go through all my notebooks, all of my archival files, and figure out what I can pitch. You know, maybe I've already got it on a tree and I don't need the notes on those records anymore. Let's see. And then I use, this is just a DNA record. I'm putting all my matches in here for my Leonard, my Irish Leonards. And it's interesting. Speaking of DNA, I have 436 matches that are first cousins to fourth to sixth cousins, and 1,300 other matches that incorporate those 400. But those 400 matches are mainly Irish. And I am really struck by the fact that my mother's family must, oh my God, I must have 200 matches on her family alone. So that kind of tells you how things can get kind of lopsided. But I eventually will find out more about my mother's family. Okay. All right, let's talk about methods. The first is that you need to be open to new ideas. And that is that family stories may be incorrect, they may be they may be muddled, or they can be gems of hand-me-down information. And a really good example of this is my husband's family. My husband is Irish, and they are convinced that they, you know, come from the kings of Ireland. And in fact, my sister-in-law went to Ireland and picked out an abbey in which these royal Donohues are buried, and had pictures made of all of this abbey, etc., because those were the relatives. Well, back in the Victorian era, people peddled genealogies to families, just like they kind of do today. But these were connecting you back to royalty or to famous people or to Abraham Lincoln or to George Washington or whatever. And they were just totally incorrect. I mean, it was kind of like, yeah, we can say that we all are, you know, descended from the kings of Ireland, but I mean, how can everybody go back to a king of Ireland? I mean, you know, there were kinships, and you might be the great nephew of a lower king of Ireland, but not everyone could be royalty in the entire country. So the Victorians peddled these family trees, and they were very, very big. You know, it's kind of like your family came from an ecclesiastical family of bishops in Ireland. Well, you know, not my people. I mean, my people were illiterate and came from tiny Irish villages. And I always say, they didn't come from Ireland because the castle was drafty. They came because their sod house was, cold and they were starving. And, I have mostly famine years, Ireland, Irish. And so, they came because they were starving. My other great grandfather on my Clark side came from a town, and I found the sheriff's eviction notice, telling him to get out of town, basically. And so, I'm not descended from, from royalty, but my husband's family is. So anyway, so we all have those kinds of myths, and some of the myths that are very prevalent are, for instance, that, 6 brothers came to America and they spread out throughout America. And that's why we have relatives in California and Utah and Kansas and Nebraska and, Texas. Well, the reality of it is people did immigrate, but once they hit New York, they usually had a destination, and they often stayed in the same place for years and years and years. And just because you have somebody with the same name in California does not mean that you're related to them. That in fact, their name might even have been changed, or might be a different name. I was really excited because I ran into a guy that had the same name as my grandmother. And he said, "Oh no, that's not really my name. My name is Piotrowski. We changed it, to that. And that's not a real name." So it's like my hopes were dashed. But anyway, some of the other things is that you might have heard even your grandparents may have heard something that was not correct. For instance, I have a good friend who I got interested in genealogy, and her father always told them that they were French Huguenots who had gone to England and then came to America. And so they were of French descent. So when she started in genealogy, she got stuck right away. And so I started looking up things for her and found out very clearly on that her family was not French at all. They were English, and they were not Huguenots. And in fact, they were early colonial people and had come directly from England and could find the first, person that came. So my friend had spent her entire life thinking she was descended from France. I mean, she sent her kids to a French school. They speak French. They visited France. They visited Belgium. She has little fleur-de-lis and Eiffel Towers hanging all over her Christmas tree, and she's not French. And so, some of these things may be, jarring because you heard them from your grandmother who heard them from her grandmother. So it's got to be true. Well, no, people come up with those things so she finally asked her father how he knew that they were French. And he said, "Oh, I was in a business meeting one time, and a guy said, 'Oh, Barden. Oh, that's French Huguenot name.'" And that's where her father got it. So we sometimes, hear those kinds of things. I had an aunt, and I said that my father was orphaned when he was 8, and they had an aunt who was their mother's sister, and she told them that their grandfather rode with Custer. Okay, I spent all this time researching all the muster rolls of Custer and found out that no, and supposedly he didn't die at the Battle of Bighorn because he was sick that day. So he stayed back at Fort Lincoln. Now, 2 things were true. My great-grandfather was at Fort Lincoln in the Army, but he was never in Custer's command. He was just he was just there at the fort at the same time. So I thought, well, maybe she's got the wrong grandfather. Maybe it's on the other side. Maybe it's, jump a generation. So anyway, I just did all kinds of, so then the aunt had told my father that he was a Texas Ranger. So I researched all kinds of lists of Texas Rangers, went to the research library at the Daughters of the Confederacy in San Antonio. I mean, I spent a lot of hours looking for the stuff. That turned out not to be true. When probably 30 years later, this is what I found out to be true. My great-grandfather, Jack Waldron, was on the Yellowstone expedition, and Custer guarded the expedition. So I guess technically you could say my grandfather rode with Custer. So that part was true, but I'm sure my grandfather was in a wagon and Custer was on a horse and didn't even know my grandfather. So you get the idea of how those stories are. Go back to the Texas Rangers, the same grandfather. No, he was never a Texas Ranger. He never set foot in Texas. He was never that far in Texas. It was the wrong grandfather that had been in Texas, the Corcoran grandfather. Turns out that the grandfather that I was, researching was a sheriff, and he was the, sheriff, the city marshal, the sheriff, and the chief of police in Bismarck, North Dakota in 1879, 1890. Okay, so he was a lawman. That part was true. But how did his own daughter make him into a Texas Ranger? So we can chase those family stories and grab onto them because we think that there is a gem of truth in it. But I would say to you, be a little bit skeptical. Grandpa was probably not a stowaway on a ship, because they found stowaways and the captain got paid for every person that was on board, and he did not want any people that were riding for free. Because so if grandpa was a stowaway, they would put him on land at the first port. So if people don't show up on ship's list, it may be that they came through a different port. Years ago, I did I helped write a story for Family Tree magazine with Rick Kroom, who is a very accomplished genealogist and has written a number of books. And he is a shirt tail relative. We're not really related, except his great-grandmother was married to my great-grandfather as the second wife. So I guess maybe down the road we might share some DNA through the grandfather. But anyway, so he had access to all these expensive databases, which I didn't at the time, and was able to pay for all kinds of Irish records, which were about, I think they're right now, about £8 sterling for one record through Irish roots. So he was able to do all kinds of research, and then we were collaborating on this. And so a couple of records for when my great-grandfather came over on ship's records, he presented and he said, we don't know if that's him. And the minute the article got published in the magazine, we had 3 people that came forward and said, you looked at New York records and you looked at Baltimore records and you looked at Philadelphia records, but you didn't look at New Orleans port records. And there he is. And not only was it him, it was also my great-grandmother that he would marry the next year on the same ship. So there's always somebody, that can give you more feedback on where your research is lacking. And so that was a great, you're just never really certain till you get it nailed down. But had I thought about an Irish immigrant coming through New Orleans, now that makes sense because he landed up in Minnesota, and what is close to Minnesota is the Missouri and the Mississippi. So a lot of people came through the ports of New Orleans if they were wanting to take out homestead land in the Midwest. So you might think about that as well. Okay, spelling is not important. In 1880, the literacy rate was about 80% of people were functionally illiterate, which meant that when the census takers came around, they asked them how to spell their name, and they spelled it the way, or they spelled it phonetically. And so you will find that there are all kinds of variant names. I saw an Irish name in a census yesterday, and the name is Moore, and it was spelled Moor without the E. So Moore, you know, and that name could look like Morn in the writing. So it might be hard to find. What I would encourage you to do is that if you have something there to write with, is to spell some of the names that you are looking for. Spell them 10 different ways. Because the census taker might spell them phonetically. If it is a difficult foreign name, it might come out very different. So I would tell you to do some variant names. For instance, when I look up Waldron, I look up Waldon, Waldon, and Walden, but the name is actually Waldron. And I also put an L in there sometimes to see. And if you are, so spelling is not important. People might spell their name differently in a town after a while to make themselves distinct from other family members. My grandfather's brother, they spell their name Walden. The entire family thinks the name is Walden. And I'm not certain his brother was ever literate. So that's how their name is spelled. So there's an entire, you know, there's 3 generations of family that think the family name is Waldon and not Waldron. Also, if you've got a lot of difficult foreign names, keep in mind that they may be shortened. The myth, one of the other myths, is that people got their names changed at Castle Garden, which was the first immigration port in America, or at Ellis Island. And that is simply a myth. Ellis Island had, I think, 157 interpreters in various languages. And if you came in and you had a name like a Slovaski, they knew how to spell it because they spoke that language. And so they spelled your name out based on the documents with which you left your home port. And if you are doing European research, you will find that in Germany, in all kinds of countries, Czechoslovakia, Bohemia, as it was called then, Russia, you could not leave the country without going to the police station and registering. And so your documents on the ship were the ones that allowed you to get out of that country. Now in Russia, we find that Jewish families often changed the names of their children and made the sons younger because there was mandatory conscription. And so at 12 or 14, your son could be conscripted. So oftentimes a 14-year-old might be made into an 8-year-old, or he might be made into a girl when he's registered, so that to hide him, so the people could get out of the country. So that kind of thing went on. But keep in mind that if your relatives got to Castle Garden or they got to Ellis Island, their names were not changed. They walked out of the immigration center with the same names that they came in. Now, they might have changed their names later. They might have wanted to Americanize them. They might have, just decided that their names were too unwieldy to be used. For instance, my grandmother's name was always on her marriage certificate, Frances Powers. And for years, I researched the Irish Powers family because all my aunts who were alive at the time told me that she was from an Irish family and she had been orphaned and blah, blah, blah. Well, then later on, I find out that she grew up with a Polish family. And in the 1920 census, the census asked, what's your native tongue? And my grandmother said Polish. Well, if she says Irish girl, what is she doing speaking Polish? So I began to, talk to my aunts a little bit more. And I said, what was she doing with this Polish family and speaking Polish at home and saying in 1920 that she spoke Polish? And they said, oh, they just took her in so they'd have a little worker, a little maid. And I thought to myself, that makes no sense. Polish working class families do not take on two little girls so they'll have dishwashers down the road. I mean, there's got to be some family connection. So I went back to my mother's hometown and went to the parish records. And in the marriage books, when my grandmother got married, she got married under the name Frances Powers. And the priest put an asterisk by her name and put under this girl is not Irish. She is from a Polish American family. Okay. So for whatever reason, it irritated the priest that she was not, that is not her name. So then I thought, well, I've got to do something to kind of connect her to this Polish family. There's got to be a reason they took her in. So I put up a tree with this Polish family and it sat there for 10 years. Nobody touched that tree, meaning on Ancestry, if somebody has, you can get hints, and the hints mean that somebody else has a tree and it'll show you somebody else's tree. Well, you can go into that tree and see what information they have that you don't have. And it might be pictures, it might be marriage records, it might be all kinds of things on their side of the family that they own that you've never seen. So the family sat there and I thought, there is nobody in this entire United States or the world that is interested in this family. One day I went in there and there was another tree. And it was a woman who had tons of information on this family. So I contacted her and I explained the whole deal. And I said, do you have any idea why, my grandmother would have been taken in by this family with her sister and, all that. And the woman comes back to me and says, well, you know what? I think he was their stepfather. I think your great grandmother was married to him. And she died and he took the girls. Bingo. Doesn't that make sense? And so anyway, so that's what it turned out to be, that he married my great grandmother and she died probably in childbirth or died very soon after the wedding. And he took on her very small daughters and raised them. And so, it makes sense. And she didn't want to be, their name was Putz, which in Yiddish has very bad connotations. I mean, it means a stupid person, an oaf. It also has a kind of obscene connotations. So she definitely did not want to be a Putz. So she changed her name to Powers. And all of their lives, her daughters believed that she was Irish, even though she spoke Polish and German. So people can believe these family myths, even though they do not make sense with reality. And my one of my aunts said that they would sit there and they would listen to my grandmother and her sister, who lived around the corner, speaking in Polish. And when they figured out that they were talking about somebody being pregnant, or they figured out the words, the sisters would catch on and they would switch to German. Now these aunts later on told me that story with a straight face. And I would say, well, how do good Irish girls learn Polish and German? So people believe these family stories, even though they make no sense. So years later, I was lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, as genealogists often do, and thought to myself, I wonder if my grandmother ever went to a Polish church in the small town. So guess what? The Genealogical Society there had all of these church records in Latin for the Polish church. And there I found my grandmother as sponsor, baptismal sponsor to many babies and standing up for people at weddings. And they listed her name as Franziska Woznicki, which is her Polish name. And so that has started me, on a whole realm of, the name is probably Wozniak. I don't know if Woznicki is a variation, but anyway, so probably the name is Wozniak. And her sister Anna was actually named Stanislava, which is Stella in Polish. So anyway, so I learned their real names, Franziska. So anyway. Okay, so as I've said, surnames change and evolve over the generations. People make it easier, they shorten it, they spell it a different way. It may still be the same family, but you're just looking at some variations. Okay. The next one is learn some broad historical details about your ancestors' country of origin. That we talked earlier about the Pennsylvania Dutch. Well, the Pennsylvania Dutch were Palatines, and they were the original problem refugees. In 1710, they were fleeing the Rhineland in Germany because of the Spanish War, and they were being forced off the land. They were all farmers and vineyard workers. So they got permission to come to England. So they all came to England, and they were there, and the British welcomed them because they thought they were farmers, as in, out in the field with the cows and the corn and the wheat and the barley. Well, they weren't farmers, they were vineyard workers, meaning that they knew how to do wine, to do grapes and stuff, do all that kind of work, which, you don't grow too many grapes for wine in England. So there they were a number of all these Palatine families in Germany, in England, and they were of no use to the British. So the British got 10 ships and put them all on ships and sent them to guess where? Colonial America. And they kept them in work camps in New York on the Mohawk River, and they were turpentine camps, and they basically were detention camps. And there was an East camp and a West camp. They kept and these were families. These were not just men, or men, children, women, and they kept them all there. And they were supposed to cut down the pine forests and burn them for turpentine for the British Navy. And it was just backbreaking work and horrible work. Well, the Palatines really decided that was not very workable, and they really needed to do something else. So they made friends with the Iroquois Indians. And if you know about the Iroquois, they are a matriarchal society, meaning the women are all the sachems or the chiefs. And the Palatines said to them, if you will let us farm your land, we will share the food with you. We will do all the work if you'll let us use your land. And so the Iroquois said, sounds like a good deal. So they made these pacts. The British decided to give up on the Palatines and just basically told them, you're on your own. So here they were, these huge family groups who would later be called the Pennsylvania Dutch, are there in America, in New York, and they farmed, and they became very prosperous. But this is what is really interesting about the Palatines. When the British wanted them to come and fight in the French and Indian Wars, the Palatines, who had land deals with the Iroquois, said, no dice, we're not killing Indians for you. We're neutral. And so then when things started heating up and George III, wanted to, do all the things that took away American liberties, the Palatines signed the Coxsackie Agreement, which was the first declaration of independence from Great Britain in America. And it's signed by all the leading Palatine families. Now, when they came to recruit the Palatines to fight against the colonists, the Americans, the Palatines said, no deal. Guess whose side we're on? And they fought in the American Revolution. Most families are lucky to have one Revolutionary War person. In my husband's tree, they are Palatines. He has 16 that I have found so far. So not only did the fathers, the brothers, the sons, the cousins, I mean, entire family groups fought. And so my husband already has 16 Revolutionary War ancestors, and they were all Palatines. So that's an example of some historical details about your country's, about your ancestors' country of origin. And so knowing that gives a really rich history to what you're looking at, and placing your ancestors in a historical context. Social forces and pivotal events often impel migration. The famine years in Ireland, pogroms in Russia toward the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, military enlistment in German states. They were all at war, and they conscripted your young sons. And then the 1862 Homestead Act signed by Lincoln impacted European migration because different states, which were territories during the time, actually had immigration societies and went after groups of immigrants to come to America and fill out and take out homestead claims. So that helped populate communities. Okay. We are wrapping up now, but does anybody have any particular questions?
No question, but I'd make a quick comment. When you were talking about the spelling of names and how you can't just be focused on that. When you do research, I found when I do research on Ancestry, it will accommodate you for that, and it will give you other spellings, so you're not going to miss out on something.
Yes, yes. And we'll talk next time about using wildcards and using asterisks and different variations if you're not familiar with that in terms of doing, Ancestry is great that it will give you the variations of the names and some of the names that you have never even thought about being close to your family's names. Maybe it is you're looking for a name that starts with a W and they give you some V's, and you've got to remember that in some languages, the W's are pronounced as V. So if you're looking for a Wogel, it might truly be Vogel, and the records will be there. My favorite one, and I'll go into detail later about this, is I was looking for my Hockeries, the ones that are Scottish, but not really. And I found them in the 1870 census under, are you ready for this? Chillicothe. Now, how do you go from Hockery to Chillicothe? I don't know. I don't know if they were hiding out. I don't know if that was an alias. They're hiding from the law. I wouldn't put it past them. But for whatever reason, I never would have found Chillicothe. And the only way I found that was not through the variation, because Ancestry did not come up with that. But I had a clue that they were there in 1870 because their daughter was a servant at a farm. And I figured she was only 17. I bet she's still with her family, but they're in that same town. So I got the census of the town and I went through it line by line looking for Margaret and Charles. And that's how I found the Chillicothe family, which were my great-grandparents, but really the Hockeries. So yeah, so the variation name I never would have found that record. I never would have known where they were in 1870 in Iroquois County, Illinois, if I hadn't done that. So that's a good point, Ted. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I will see you all next week. And I would encourage you, if you don't have an Ancestry subscription, to go to the Mid-Continent Library, get a card, and then go into the Midwest Genealogy Center, which just asks for your card. You can put it in there permanently. Or now that it's open, you could go out there. But you can look up the census and you can look up family trees on the Ancestry Library edition. make a decision on whether, Ancestry is in your future. Once you put a tree in there, it's in there permanently. That if you drop your subscription, Ancestry kind of owns your tree. You can go back in anytime and change it if you have a subscription, but it will be there forever. They don't take it down when you drop your subscription. Okay. All right. Well, it's wonderful meeting you all and seeing you again, Ted. And we will see you next Tuesday at 10 o'clock if you don't have any additional questions. So I hope you'll get something done this week. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You.
Bye now.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jerry.
I'll be in touch with Lori and see what I need to do next week to get us started. I don't know, Mary. I think I'm just kind of along for the ride here too. So
Yeah. Well, I think all you do is you become the host and you make me a host and that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I maybe just getting started like we did today. So I'll make sure I'll check with Lori, make sure I'm not missing something.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you're
All
doing
right.
fine.
All right, we'll look forward to next week. Thanks. It's been great. I'm coming into this totally, new as something be fun, and you're making it that way. Thank you.
Oh, well, good. Well,
Yeah.
of course, I love it. So it's fun. It's fun for me to get other people hooked.
Yeah. Well, have a good week.
You too. Bye now.